My name is Margaret Hayes, and my daughter-in-law told me she'd abort her unborn child if I didn't sign over my house. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It was a rainy Tuesday night when it happened, the kind of night where even the walls feel damp with silence. My son Evan had just finished telling me they were expecting a baby. The moment should have felt joyous. I should have cried tears of happiness. But instead, Lila leaned across the dinner table and said, "It plain cold, calculated. If you don't transfer the house to my name, I'll get rid of the baby. Simple as that." I blinked, thinking maybe I had misheard. I even smiled awkwardly, waiting for the punchline. But her face was stone, not a twitch of remorse or uncertainty. She held her glass of water like a queen commanding a peasant. My hands shook. "Excuse me," I said. Evan didn't say a word. He looked down at his plate as if it were suddenly the most interesting thing in the room. I turned to him, searching for his eyes. "She's not serious," I said. "Right." Lila gave a soft laugh. "Oh, I'm dead serious. This house is wasted on you, Margaret. You're old. Alone. Evan and I need space. We're starting a family. A real one." "Real one? You've been living here rent-free for 3 years," I reminded her, my voice cracking. "You moved in after your startup failed and said you needed time." She waved her hand. "Yes, and now we've outgrown that phase. So either you hand over the house or, well, it's just a clump of cells right now anyway." That line, that heartless sentence, echoed in my chest like thunder. This wasn't about building a family. It was blackmail. A threat dressed in maternity clothes. I looked at Evan again. "Say something," I whispered. "Please." He sighed. "Mom, can we not fight tonight? It's just a conversation." "A conversation," I snapped. "She just threatened to end your child's life unless I give her my home." Lila stood up and gently placed her napkin on the table. "I'll let you two talk," she said with a shrug. "I'm going to bed. But don't take too long to decide. Timing matters." She walked off without looking back, her heels tapping like a clock counting down. I sat frozen, my appetite dead, my heart shaking. Evan stared at his hands. "She's scared," he muttered. "Scared people cry," I said. "They don't issue ultimatums." "I don't know what you want me to do, Mom," he said. "We're under a lot of pressure. I just lost my job. The baby's coming. She's emotional. And I'm not." I asked. "You're asking me to give away the last thing your father left me, our family home. For what? To keep Lila from throwing a tantrum." Evan stood and rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm tired," he said. "Let's talk in the morning." He left me at the table alone with my cold stew and colder thoughts. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. This was the same house where I had raised Evan, where my late husband Greg had patched the roof with his bare hands, where we had danced in the kitchen after Evan's acceptance letter to college came in the mail. This house was a museum of love and struggle, and now it was being reduced to a bargaining chip. I walked into the living room and looked at the framed photos lining the walls. There was one of Greg holding newborn Evan with tears in his eyes, another from Evan's wedding day, though I now realize the smile on Lila's face that day never reached her eyes. I remembered a conversation Greg and I once had. It was late after Evan and Lila's engagement party. We were washing dishes, and he had said, "She's sharp, that one. But there's something about her. Something too smooth. Be careful, Mar." Back then, I thought he was being overly cautious. Lila came from a broken home. I thought maybe she just needed stability, love, acceptance. Now I wondered if she had seen Greg's house, my house, as part of the dowry. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I wandered the halls, touching the walls, running my fingers over the grooves and dents we never got around to fixing. Every mark had a memory, a reason, a life behind it. In the early morning light, I sat at the kitchen counter with a blank notepad. I wrote down her words. "If you don't transfer the house to my name, I'll get rid of the baby." I underlined them 3 times, not because I needed to remember, but because I knew I was going to fight. She thought I was weak, old, alone. But she had underestimated something far more dangerous than a frail widow, a mother with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. I didn't say a word to either of them the next morning. Lila breezed past me in the hallway wearing a silky robe, humming like nothing had happened. Evan sat at the kitchen island scrolling through his phone, avoiding my eyes. There was no apology, no acknowledgement. So I made them breakfast just like I always did. Eggs, toast, fresh strawberries from the garden. Lila took one look and scoffed. No gluten-free option, she said. I smiled tightly. You seemed fine with pancakes last week. She rolled her eyes and walked away. Evan just mumbled a quiet thanks and ate in silence, but my hands were calm. Because now I was watching, really watching, the way she handled him like a tool, the subtle way she spoke for him in every decision, and how despite claiming to care so deeply about this child, she hadn't once shown a genuine maternal moment. No rubbing of the belly, no looking at baby books. That was when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. This pregnancy wasn't some joyful surprise. It was leverage. I went up to my room and opened the old cedar chest where Greg used to keep our papers. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just anything to anchor me. What I found instead was a letter. Greg had written it before he passed. It was tucked behind a folder of utility bills, sealed in an envelope that read, "In case Margaret ever forgets who she is." I opened it with trembling fingers. Mar, if you're reading this, you're probably in a moment of doubt. Maybe about yourself, or maybe about someone close to you. Whatever it is, remember this: you don't owe anyone more than what your conscience allows. Not even Evan. Especially not anyone who tries to take by force what was meant to be shared with love. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried quietly so no one would hear. That afternoon, Lila came into my room uninvited. "We need to talk," she said, arms crossed. I sat calmly, folding Greg's letter and slipping it into my pocket. "I've been thinking," she continued, "and I'm willing to compromise." "Oh?" I asked. She smiled, sweet like syrup laced with arsenic. "You can stay in the house. We'll just put it under my name for now so things are easier legally. You know, future inheritance taxes, that sort of thing." "Of course," I said. "Because this is about making things easier for me." She narrowed her eyes. "I'm offering a generous path forward. Most people your age don't even own a house. You should be grateful." "You're right," I said. "I am fortunate. Which is why I plan to hold on to that fortune." Her lips twitched. "You're making a mistake." "I might be," I replied. "But it's mine to make." She stormed out, but not before muttering under her breath, "Guess I'll just schedule that appointment then." I didn't flinch. I simply closed the door behind her and locked it. The next morning, she posted a photo of her stomach on Instagram with the caption, "Blessed." But some people just don't know when to step aside. Hundreds of likes. Comments flooded in congratulating her. No one knew the truth. That this child was being used as ransom. That this home was under siege. Later that day, Evan approached me. "She's upset," he said. "She thinks you're being cold." I put down the laundry basket I was carrying. "Do you believe what she's doing is okay?" "She's scared, Mom." "No. Evan," I said. "She's strategic. You're just too blind to see it." He stepped back like I'd slapped him. "That's my wife. And that's my house," I said. "I'm your son." I paused. "Then act like it." He walked out. No apology. No promise to fix things. That night, I stood in the hallway outside their bedroom. I could hear them arguing, low and hushed but urgent. Words like deadline, control papers. Lila's voice pierced through. "She's just an old woman stuck in grief. Push a little harder and she'll break." I turned and walked back to my room with purpose. I wasn't going to break, but I was going to bend just long enough to make her think I had. I called a locksmith the next morning, had every lock in the house changed, gave Evan a key. Lila didn't get one. When she found out, she screamed. "What the hell is this? You locked me out of my house?" "Correction," I said. "My house. And you're welcome to stay if you act like a guest, not a thief." Her face turned to ice. "You really want to play hardball with me?" I leaned in. "No, I want to play smart. Which means pretending I'm weaker than you think I am." She backed away slowly, finally unsure of herself. But I wasn't finished. I had seen what she really was now. And I wasn't going to wait for her next move. I was going to make mine first. The days that followed were a tense charade. Lila stopped pretending to be sweet. She barely spoke to me unless Evan was in the room, and even then her words dripped with venom disguised as concern. "Margaret, did you remember to take your pills today? Shouldn't you be resting instead of walking around with laundry baskets?" Evan would chuckle nervously or brush it off, never once questioning her tone. He was slipping further under her spell, and I was watching it all unfold like a storm slowly brewing across the sky. I started writing everything down. Every strange comment, every manipulative tactic, every slip of the tongue. I began documenting it all in a notebook I kept tucked in the bottom of the linen closet, a place no one ever looked. I even set up the baby monitor in the hallway outside their bedroom, hidden behind a dusty photo frame. I wasn't proud of it, but I didn't feel safe anymore. Not really. Then one afternoon, I overheard something that cemented everything. I was folding towels in the hallway when I heard Lila on the phone. She had no idea I was home early from the store. "No, listen. If she signs it over, we're golden. And if not, I've already looked up clinics that won't ask too many questions. She's not calling my bluff." There was a pause. "Yeah, he'll do whatever I say. He's a mama's boy. But with enough guilt, I can make him believe it's his idea." I stood frozen. The towel slipped from my hand. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was being dissected piece by the very woman carrying my future grandchild. I backed away quietly, making sure she didn't see me. So it was true. She was using the pregnancy as a weapon, and Evan, my son, my baby, was being turned into a pawn in her sick game. That night, I pretended nothing had happened. I served dinner like always. Sat at the table. Let her talk about nursery colors and baby shower themes like she actually cared. But inside me, something had changed. I no longer hoped she would come around. I no longer waited for Evan to wake up and see her clearly. No, now I was preparing for battle. After dinner, I brought Evan out to the garden. The night air was cool and the lavender bushes swayed gently. "Do you trust me?" I asked him out of nowhere. He looked up, startled. "Of course I do. You're my mom." "Then tell me something," I said softly. "Do you feel like you're making your own decisions lately?" He frowned. "What kind of question is that? Just answer it. Honestly." He hesitated. "Lila has strong opinions, yeah, but we're a team. That's how marriage works." "No," I said gently. "That's how manipulation works when one person pretends it's love." He looked hurt, defensive. "You've never liked her." "I wanted to like her." "I tried," I said. "But now she's threatening the life of your child unless I give her everything I own. That's not love, Evan. That's cruelty." He looked away. "She's scared. She doesn't know how to handle stop making excuses for her," I said, voice rising for the first time. "You're a father now. Or at least, you will be. Start acting like one. Protect your child, not the person using it as a bargaining chip." His mouth opened, but no words came. For a moment, I saw flickers of the old Evan, the one who used to stand up for his friends, who once cried because a bird hit our window and didn't survive. But then, the shutters fell again. "I need to think," he mumbled. And he walked inside. The next morning, the locks had been tampered with. Not broken, not yet. But I could see scratches on the doorknob and the keyhole slightly bent. Someone had tried to force their way in. I checked the security camera I'd installed above the porch months ago. Sure enough, around 3:14 a.m., A figure in a hoodie approached the door, tried something, and left. Too tall to be Lila. Too slim to be Evan. Someone she hired. I printed the stills, labeled them with the date and time, and tucked them into my folder of growing evidence. Whatever game she thought she was playing, it had just escalated. Later that evening, Lila was in the living room going through baby name lists when she looked up and smiled. "So, have you made your decision yet?" I kept my face neutral. "About what the house," she said, as if it were the most casual topic in the world. "Time's ticking." I tilted my head. "You know, I was thinking, maybe I should consult a lawyer first." Her expression faltered just for a second. "Why would you need a lawyer?" she asked too quickly. "Well, I said you said something about making things easier legally. Wouldn't want to make a mistake with the paperwork." "I thought you trusted us," she said, eyes narrowing. "I do," I said, smiling sweetly. "I just don't trust paperwork." She stared at me for a long moment, then stood and walked out without another word. That night, I stood at Greg's old desk, flipping through the deed to the house. My name was the only one on it. Greg had made sure of that. Even after his death, he was protecting me. I whispered a quiet thank you into the silence. Then I took a blank sheet of paper and wrote one sentence at the top. What does she really want? Not love, not family, not even comfort. She wanted power, ownership, a legacy that came not from building something but from stealing it. But she'd chosen the wrong woman to steal from, because I wasn't afraid of her threats anymore. She could huff and puff all she wanted. This house wasn't made of straw. It was made of everything I had built with my own hands, and no one, not even the woman carrying my grandchild, was going to take that from me. The next morning, I woke with Greg's voice echoing in my mind. "She's too smooth, Mar. Something about her smile doesn't fit her eyes." I hadn't understood it back then. I thought he was being critical, maybe even protective to a fault. But now those words pulsed with clarity. His instincts had been right. Lila wasn't just self-centered or sharp-tongued. She was strategic, transactional, cold. And somehow Greg had seen through her long before I did. That morning, I walked into Evan's old bedroom. It was still filled with traces of his boyhood trophies on the shelves, posters peeling at the corners, old books stacked beside the bed. The only thing new was a roll of wallpaper Lila had chosen for the nursery, pale blue with golden constellations. I ran my hand over it and shook my head. This wasn't for the baby. It was for display, a performance of maternal devotion for the outside world. She cared more about image than life itself. Downstairs, Lila was already measuring the hallway walls with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Figuring out where we'll hang the floating shelves for the nursery books," she said, not looking up. "It'll make the space look more open." I frowned. In the hallway, she stood and stretched. "We'll knock down this wall. Open floor concept. That's what modern families want. We'll knock down the wall." My teeth clenched, but I said nothing. Instead, I pulled out my phone and searched real estate agents near me. It didn't surprise me when I found a familiar name listed under a recent online review, Lila's best friend Tessa. And the review wasn't just for services rendered. It was a glowing thank you from Lila H. for helping her plan for future ownership. I clicked on Tessa's profile. She specialized in discrete estate transfers and consultations. The dates on the interaction: 2 weeks before Lila told me she was pregnant. So that was it. This pregnancy had always been a tool. The baby was bait. The house was the prize. That night, Lila made dinner a rare event. She cooked pasta, lit candles, and acted like we were some happy suburban family again. "Evan's been stressed," she said cheerfully. "I thought I'd do something nice." Evan smiled faintly. "It smells amazing." I watched her pour wine for herself, one small, defiant glass. A pregnant woman drinking wine, even just a little, didn't sit right with me. It confirmed something I already feared. She didn't see that child as someone to nurture, just someone to bargain with. When Evan left to answer a call, I leaned in. I know about Tessa, I said softly. Her fork froze midair. I know you've been meeting with her about real estate, I continued. I saw the reviews, the timing. This was your plan all along. She gave a cold smile. And what exactly do you think you can do with that information? Nothing yet, I said. But plans have a funny way of unraveling when people start pulling the right threads. She stood up the chair, scraping across the floor. You're trying to make Evan hate me. No, I said. You're doing that all on your own. A few days later, Evan left for a business interview out of town, when Lila said he should go alone to focus. I seized the opportunity. I went into the nursery while she was out and opened the closet. Amid designer onesies and branded diaper bags still in plastic, I found a binder. Inside were invoices, renovation quotes, lawyer consultations, listings for similar homes in the neighborhood with potential resale value. She had it all mapped out, even scribbled notes in the margins: sell before second trimester and get house appraised once transfer complete. My stomach twisted. This wasn't nesting. This was asset acquisition. When Lila returned home, she barely looked at me. But that evening, she crossed a line she'd only hinted at before. I was sitting on the back porch sipping tea when she appeared with a manila envelope. She dropped it on the table. Medical opinion, she said casually. Just in case you start to forget things. You've been leaving the stove on lately. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? I had you evaluated, she said. Dr. Peretti's note says there are signs of mild cognitive decline. Nothing major, just enough that maybe Evan should take over the financial responsibilities. You forged a diagnosis, I whispered. She smiled. Prove it. I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. The letterhead looked official, but something about the wording was off. Vague, impersonal, and the signature barely legible. You went too far, I said. You really think this will hold up? I don't need it to hold up forever, she said, stepping closer. Just long enough for you to sign, or for a judge to intervene. Either way, I win. She turned and walked back inside, humming a lullaby. I sat there for hours, the night closing in around me. My tea had gone cold. My heart felt like it was trapped in ice. But as I stared at that fake diagnosis, I didn't feel broken. I felt focused. If she wanted to play legal games, so would I. But I would play them better. It was no longer about keeping the house. It was about keeping my sanity and protecting the child who hadn't even been born yet from a mother who saw it as a transaction. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat at Greg's old desk, the fake diagnosis on one side, my notebook of evidence on the other. Everything inside me wanted to scream, to rip that forged document to shreds and storm into her room with it. But that's what she wanted for me to lose control, to become the unstable old woman in the story she was writing. So I didn't scream. I recorded. The next morning, I told Lila I'd be heading to the community center to join a senior yoga class, a lie she didn't bother to hide her amusement over. Just don't forget your mat or your memory, she called after me. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Mr. Daniel Locke had been our family attorney for years. He handled Greg's will, and he had always treated me like a human being, not just a signature. When I explained what had been happening, his smile slowly faded. She said she'd abort the child if I didn't give her the house. I said quietly. He stared at me. That's coercion, Margaret. It might even constitute blackmail. I nodded. And now she's creating a paper trail to make me look mentally unfit. If she files for legal control of the property citing health concerns, she could push for emergency guardianship. He leaned back. That's rare, but not impossible. Especially if your son sides with her. He's already halfway there. I handed him the envelope. He examined the letter and raised an eyebrow. This signature's off. I know Peretti, he's a general practitioner. This isn't his handwriting. I'll contact his office discreetly to confirm, but it smells fake. And the real estate consultation, I asked. He nodded. Good. That helps build a pattern. You're doing the right thing, Margaret. Even if it tears my family apart, I asked softly. His eyes were kind. Your family is already tearing. You're just trying to survive the collapse. Back at home, I moved quietly, observing, watching. That evening, Lila began talking loudly on the phone in the living room, clearly knowing I was nearby. I grabbed my phone and tapped record, slipping it into the bookshelf behind me. I'm telling you, it's almost done. She's starting to doubt herself. I keep suggesting she might be slipping and she doesn't even fight back anymore. A pause. No, Evan doesn't know everything. He wouldn't understand. I'm protecting him. Another pause, then laughter. If all goes well, I'll have the papers by next week and then we can move forward. She'll probably thank me someday for saving her. My fingers curled into fists. She wasn't just cruel. She was rehearsed. 2 days later, a package arrived at the house. Lila signed for it and left it on the dining table without a second glance. It was a new baby monitor upgraded with video, but I hadn't ordered it. I opened the app it was linked to. It was registered to her email, and it was labeled Living Room Surveillance. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just watching me. She was trying to collect her own version of evidence, waiting for me to have a meltdown or say something she could twist. That night, I turned off all the lights in the house and waited. When the hallway was pitch black, I removed the monitor and replaced it with an identical one I bought earlier that day. This one linked to my account. Two could play this game. I started baiting her gently, subtly. I'd misplace a cup. I'd call a neighbor and forget the reason I called. And each time I'd watch her eyes light up as if she were already imagining the court ruling in her favor. But behind the scenes, I was documenting everything. Her phone calls, her behavior, her manipulation of Evan, and the faked medical report. I now had a signed statement from Dr. Peretti's office confirming he never issued such a document. Daniel Locke was building a case, and he was impressed. You're doing more detective work than half the lawyers I know, he said with a smile. I smiled back, but there was no joy in it. I didn't want to be a detective. I wanted to be a mother, a grandmother, a woman who could trust the people she let into her home. But Lila had made that impossible. The real crack came when I heard her speaking to her mother on the phone. I was upstairs folding Evan's old baby clothes I'd kept for decades when I heard her voice through the floor vent. No, I haven't told him yet. I'm not actually pregnant anymore. My body went cold. I had the abortion last week, the same day she refused to sign. Told the clinic it was a private matter. They didn't ask questions. She called my bluff, but it doesn't matter, I'm still getting the house. I collapsed onto the bed. The child was gone, and she had done it quietly, without telling Evan, without remorse. The thing she had used to blackmail me, the life she'd sworn she'd bring into the world if I obeyed, was now discarded. And she was still pretending, still planning to move forward with the lie. I sat in the darkness, trembling. Then I stood up, and I walked to my drawer, pulled out my folder of evidence, and made a call to Daniel Locke. It's time, I said, because Lila may have thought she ended the pregnancy. But what she didn't know was that she also ended every chance she ever had of winning. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even when I passed the empty roll of nursery wallpaper still resting by the hallway wall, untouched and forgotten, like everything else Lila had pretended to care about. Because the grief had hardened into something sharper, something clearer. Resolve. Daniel scheduled the first legal appointment for early that week. We met at his office behind a row of neat brick buildings that seemed to mock how messy life could become behind closed doors. I handed him the latest audio recording, the one where Lila admitted she was no longer pregnant. He listened with a stone face, then nodded. This changes everything, he said. She lied to Evan. She's still pretending, I said. She's manipulating him into pushing for the deed. She's building her case on fraud, Daniel said, which gives us room to work with and room to protect you. He had already filed a motion to document the forged medical report and Lila's attempts at coercion. Now we were moving to secure an injunction on any potential property transfers. He also suggested I consider changing my will and placing the house in a living trust, one with very specific conditions Lila could never touch. I agreed, because I wasn't just trying to protect a house anymore. I was trying to protect the version of myself that Greg knew, the version who didn't back down when it mattered. Back at home, I started acting, playing the part of the forgetful old woman a little more earnestly. Lila began to grow smug again. She'd offer to walk me to the mailbox. She'd talk louder, slower, like I was losing my hearing. But what she didn't realize was that every word was now being recorded. She was writing the final chapter of her own undoing, and I was just holding the pen. One evening, she brought up the house again casually, like asking for a new brand of cereal. "You know," she said, stirring her tea, "Evan's been so stressed. I think if you truly wanted to help, you'd sign the papers and just take the weight off all our shoulders." "And what weight would that be?" I asked, watching her closely. "The uncertainty. The constant back and forth," she said, sighing dramatically. "If it's going to be ours anyway, why not just get it over with? I mean, you don't want to die and leave it in probate, do you?" I blinked slowly. "What a kind sentiment, Lila." She shrugged. "I'm practical. It's how I was raised." "Funny," I said. "Greg used to say practicality without conscience is just cruelty in disguise." She flinched for the first time in weeks. I stood up, picked up my teacup, and smiled. "Well, I'm sure your practicality will serve you well. Just not in this house." She didn't say anything, just narrowed her eyes and left the room. The next day, I sat Evan down. He looked exhausted, hair unkempt, face, pale dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't the man I'd raised. He was a shadow of himself lost in someone else's dream. "Evan," I said gently, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear me this time." He sighed. "Mom, I don't want to do this again." "I know," I said, "but you're going to want to hear this." And then I played the recording, the one where Lila admitted to ending the pregnancy without telling him. At first, he sat still. Then, as the words echoed through the living room, his jaw clenched. His hands began to tremble. When the recording ended, there was a long, suffocating silence. "She lied to me," he said, almost in disbelief. She said she was still pregnant." "She's still pretending," I said softly. "Still using that child to manipulate you and me." He looked at me with haunted eyes. "I let her do this to you." I placed a hand on his. "You wanted to believe in your marriage. That's not a sin. But now you know." He swallowed. "What do we do? I already have a lawyer. I've collected everything. But this next step, it has to come from you. She needs to see you won't be her puppet anymore." He looked down, then nodded. Slowly, firmly. "Then let's finish this." That night, he confronted her. I didn't hear everything, but I heard enough. Shouting, crying, then silence. When the door slammed, it wasn't Evan who left. It was Lila. She packed a bag and stormed out, screaming something about betrayal, legal revenge, and not going down without a fight. I stood in the shadows of the hallway holding Greg's letter in my hands. We hadn't won yet, but we'd taken the power back. The next day, Daniel filed the final restraining injunction against any attempted property claims by Lila. Evan formally withdrew his support for the deed transfer. And with the evidence we had, including the false diagnosis, the coerced threats, and the abortion concealed as manipulation, we were building a strong countermeasure against any legal retaliation. Evan asked to stay for a while in his old room. He needed space, time to rebuild, to understand how much he'd given away just to please someone who never truly loved him. I made him his favorite pancakes the next morning. He didn't say much, but when he hugged me after breakfast, it was the first real embrace we'd shared in months. The baby was gone. That wound didn't heal easily, but I swore to myself that from now on, every room in this house would be filled only with love, not power, plays, not coercion, not cold manipulation dressed as family. And if Lila ever tried to come back, she wouldn't find the same old woman waiting quietly. She'd find someone who remembered exactly who she was and what she was willing to do to protect what mattered. It was quiet for a few days after Lila left unnaturally quiet. Evan walked through the house like a man waking from a dream, seeing everything through fresh eyes. He apologized often without prompting. He'd pause in the kitchen or on the porch and murmur, "I'm sorry for not noticing," or "I should have seen it sooner." Each time I told him the same thing, "It's not about what you saw then. It's about what you do now." And to his credit, he was trying. Really trying. But just as the air started to clear, the storm rolled back in. Lila filed a complaint. Not against Evan. Not against me personally. She went to the local family services office and reported me for suspected elder neglect and mental instability, claiming that Evan had left me alone and vulnerable, and that I was now a danger to myself. Her statement included allegations of hoarding paranoia and erratic behavior. It was an obvious retaliation, a twisted attempt to weaponize the same system she had been manipulating behind closed doors. I should have seen it coming. 2 officers showed up on a Wednesday morning. I welcomed them in. They walked through the house, took photos, spoke with Evan, checked for hazards or signs of confusion. I answered every question clearly. Showed them my medical history clean, no cognitive decline. Gave them the letter from Dr. Peretti's office refuting the forged document. I even showed them the pantry and fridge to prove I was well-nourished and organized. They left apologetically. But the damage wasn't the visit. It was the feeling. The idea that someone could so easily tarnish your name with nothing more than spite. That evening, Evan paced the living room, livid. "She's unhinged," he said. "What if they had believed her? What if they'd taken you away?" I placed a hand on his arm. "She's losing control. That makes people desperate." "But what now?" he asked. "What if she keeps escalating?" I looked at him carefully. "Then we escalate too, but with dignity." I had one more move left. The next day, I invited Lila's best friend Tessa over for tea. She was reluctant. She'd been avoiding me since the conflict escalated, but I made it sound harmless, said I had something to ask her face to face. We sat on the porch, a cool breeze blowing through the hedges, and I served tea in my best porcelain cups, the ones Greg gave me on our 25th anniversary. "Tessa," I said, "you helped Lila consult on selling this house, didn't you?" She blinked. She mentioned it. Said it was for future planning. "Did she tell you she was blackmailing me with a pregnancy that no longer exists?" Tessa paled. What I leaned in slightly. "She ended the pregnancy weeks ago. But she didn't tell Evan. She's still pretending. And she filed a false medical report. You might want to think about where your name appears in all this." Tessa looked down at her teacup, the weight of implication sinking in. "I didn't know it was like that," she whispered. "I thought she just wanted to feel secure." I nodded. Security built on lies doesn't last. I handed her a printed folder, screenshots of their real estate conversations, and a copy of Lila's message about using the pregnancy to get the house. "I'm not threatening you," I said. "I'm giving you a chance to distance yourself before this becomes public." Tessa stood up, lips trembling. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I won't be involved anymore." She left without finishing her tea. That night, Lila called. Her voice was cold and full of venom. "You're trying to isolate me. You went after my friends, now I'm giving people the truth," I said. "They're deciding for themselves." "You think you've won?" she hissed. "This isn't over." "No," I said quietly. "But you are." Click. The next few days were a blur. My lawyer finalized the trust. Evan filed a formal report with the county clerk to reverse any implied property transfer intentions. And then, something I never expected, Lila's parents showed up at my door. A quiet couple, polite but visibly uncomfortable. Her mother held a trembling purse strap. Her father looked like a man who had walked this road too many times with their daughter. "We heard what's been happening," her mother said. "We want you to know. We don't support it." I stood stunned. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're not the first," her father murmured. "There were others. Boyfriends, roommates, landlords. She always finds a way to twist people, use them, and when it falls apart, she blames everyone else. I let them in. We talked. They stayed for tea, told me stories, painful ones, and when they left, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. Because now I wasn't alone in the truth. Others saw it too. Evan decided to move out, not with Lila, but on his own. He needed space to rebuild. I respected that. He came by every weekend to help with repairs, clean the garden, eat a slow breakfast with me. We didn't talk much about Lila after that. The silence between us felt sacred, like the kind of silence where healing begins. One morning, while rearranging some photo albums in the attic, I found an old frame hidden behind a box. It was a picture of Evan newborn in Greg's arms, and written in Greg's handwriting on the back was a simple note: "Build something worth protecting, even when it hurts." I held it against my chest and let myself cry, not for the house, not even for the baby we lost, but for the part of me that almost forgot what I was fighting for. Lila hasn't returned, but I still sometimes look out the window expecting her to appear with another plan, another mask. If she does, I'll be ready, because now I remember who I am, and I will never forget again. Weeks passed. Autumn crept in slowly, the kind of slow that seeps into your bones and your thoughts. The leaves turned bronze and gold, and the house finally exhaled after months of holding its breath. It was strange. Even in peace, I found myself walking through the rooms like a stranger. The shadows were no longer threatening, but they whispered memory. The living room where Lila once plotted in whispers now held only the quiet tick of a clock. The hallway where I'd once feared being watched now felt hollow, echoing only with my steps. And yet, the silence was welcome. It gave me time to think, to feel again, to grieve. Because amid the battles and strategy, there was still a truth too painful to ignore. There had been a child, a possibility, a grandchild I would never hold. I began volunteering again at the hospital where I once worked. It was Daniel's suggestion, something to get me out of the house and back into the rhythm of the living. I spent time in the neonatal unit rocking newborns whose mothers were too weak or recovering. I never said much, just hummed lullabies I hadn't sung in years. Some of the nurses remembered me. One even hugged me and said, "We missed your calm." Calm. It felt like a foreign word, but maybe it was finding its way back into my life. One day, while I was trimming the rose bushes in the backyard, I heard footsteps behind me. Evan. He stood with a cup of coffee in one hand and a manila folder in the other. "I want you to see this," he said. I wiped my gloves on a towel and sat down at the patio table. He handed me the folder. Inside were pages of counseling notes, his own therapy sessions. Some typed, some handwritten. Journal entries, reflections. "I've been going every week," he said. I needed to understand how I let it go so far. I looked at him, this man who had once been my baby, and saw someone standing straighter now. He still had guilt in his eyes, but it was no longer dragging him down. It was teaching him. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it. He smiled faintly. "I've also decided to get the marriage annulled." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to explain." But he did anyway. I was in love with an illusion, and I thought, maybe if I worked hard enough, if I kept the peace long enough, the illusion would become real. But she never wanted a partner. She wanted ownership. And now I asked. He took a long sip of coffee. "Now I want my life back." Later that week, I finally opened the box Lila had left behind in the nursery closet. Inside were baby clothes still with tags, a framed ultrasound, and a journal mostly empty, but one page caught my attention. If she signs, I win. If she doesn't, well, maybe the kid was never real to begin with. I read it 3 times. It was written in her unmistakable handwriting. I closed the journal and tucked it away in the file cabinet, not out of vengeance but out of necessity. Just in case. The final legal documents came in a few days later. The house was now fully in a protected living trust under my name. My assets were secure. Lila had no claim, no access, and according to the county records, her harassment complaint had been formally withdrawn. Her silence since then hadn't been peace, it had been strategic. She was waiting. But so was I. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner with my sister and a few old friends. It was the first gathering since the chaos, and for the first time in months, laughter returned to the walls of my home. Evan even joined us, helping with the dishes, telling stories, and laughing at his own expense. I was the world's most gullible man, he joked at one point. Just the most trusting, I corrected him gently. When the evening ended and everyone left, he lingered. "You think she'll come back?" he asked. I didn't lie. I think people like her always try, but next time we won't be surprised. He nodded. "I'm thinking about moving out of state, starting fresh." "You should. You'll be okay here." I looked around at the photographs on the walls, at the roses outside the window, at the table where I'd served meals for decades. "I'll be more than okay," I said. "I'll be free." A few days later, I returned to the attic. I found the baby blanket I'd started knitting the week I first heard they were expecting. Blue, soft, half finished. I sat down with it in my lap, the yarn now a little tangled and dusty. For a long time, I just stared at it. Not with sorrow, but with gratitude. Because now I understood the child may have never made it into this world, but he saved me all the same. He forced me to wake up, to fight, to reclaim the life I almost surrendered out of fear. The next morning, I packed the blanket in a box labeled Someday. And I smiled. Because someday still felt possible again. I didn't expect to see her again so soon, but the universe has a way of testing whether your healing is real or just something you say to yourself in quiet rooms. It was a Thursday afternoon. I had just come back from the grocery store when I saw a sleek black car parked across the street. Too expensive for the neighborhood. Too polished. I knew before I even saw her that it was Lila. She stepped out dressed in beige and heels, not a single wrinkle on her shirt. Sunglasses. Cold confidence. But when she took them off, I noticed something new in her face. Desperation barely hidden beneath the gloss. She didn't approach the door. She waited on the sidewalk like a snake watching the edge of a garden. I could have ignored her. Walked inside, locked the door, drawn the curtains. But instead, I walked down the front steps and stood by the mailbox. She finally spoke. "Can we talk?" I looked her up and down. "About what?" She glanced around like she was afraid someone might be watching. "About fixing this. About undoing the damage." I laughed, not out of amusement but disbelief. "There's no undoing what you did. There's only facing it." She crossed her arms. "I made mistakes. You made choices," I corrected her. "Cruel, deliberate choices. You threatened to abort your baby if I didn't sign over my home. And then, when that didn't work, you actually did it and pretended you hadn't. Do you realize how dark that is?" She looked away. "I was desperate," she muttered. "No," I said, stepping closer. "You were entitled. And when you didn't get what you wanted, you tried to destroy the people who offered you a home." Her mouth trembled for a moment, not with regret, but with the effort of staying composed. "I lost everything." "No," I said quietly. "You gave everything up. There's a difference." She looked back at me, eyes flashing. "I came here to find some kind of peace." "You don't find peace in other people's houses, Lila," I said. You find it when you stop burning bridges and pretending the ashes make you a martyr. She looked like she might scream or cry, but instead she turned and got back in the car. The engine started, and in seconds she was gone. I didn't go inside right away. I stood by the roses, and I breathed. That night I wrote a letter. Not to Lila, not to Evan, to the child. To the life that almost was. I don't know what you would have looked like, or how your laugh would have sounded. I don't know if you would have liked music, or hated broccoli, or loved dinosaurs like your father did. But I know this: even in the short time you existed, you changed the course of my life. You showed me truth through deception, strength through sorrow. And though I'll never hold you, I promise this: I will live in a way that honors what could have been. You mattered, even if you were only ever a flicker of possibility. Love, Grandma. I folded the letter and placed it in the box labeled Someday, along with the half-finished blanket. Not because I expected another grandchild, but because I had learned that sometimes you save the good things, not just for someone else, but to remind yourself what you're capable of holding. The seasons changed. The air turned colder. Evan eventually moved out of state as planned. We spoke often, shared stories, sent photos of meals and memories and slow recoveries. He was doing well. Better. He was finding his rhythm again, and I was proud of him in a quiet, steady way. I went back to tending my garden, volunteering at the hospital, hosting neighbors for tea. I found joy in simplicity. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally cleared out everything that was false, and now only truth remained. One morning in late winter, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter postmarked from the state Evan had moved to. It was from Lila. I nearly tore it up without reading it. My fingers hovered over the corner of the envelope, shaking slightly. But curiosity is a funny thing. Even after everything, part of me still wanted to understand what she could possibly say now. Inside a single page, handwritten. Not elegant, not cruel, just shaky. Margaret, I know I don't deserve to be heard. I know you probably hate me. And if I were you, I might feel the same. But I need to say this even if you never write back. I lost the baby. Not because of you. Because of me. Because I treated it like a transaction. I was angry and scared, and I thought, if I had control over something, anything, I could finally feel safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt empty. I've been in therapy. Court-ordered, yes. But it's forced me to look at myself in ways I never have before. What I see now scares me. Because I hurt people who were kind to me. I destroyed trust that could have been a foundation. And for what? A deed, a name on paper, I know I can't come back. I'm not asking for that. But I hope someday the echo of who I was doesn't follow me forever. You don't have to forgive me. Just know that I finally see what I did. Lila. I read the letter 3 times. Not because it moved me to tears. It didn't. But because for once her words didn't feel like a performance. And yet I folded it neatly and put it away, not to keep it close, but to keep it where it belonged, the past. Life continued in quiet, steady ways. My garden began blooming again, first the snowdrops, then the daffodils. I added a bench beneath Greg's old apple tree. A neighbor's child came over sometimes to play with my cat, and I began teaching her how to tend to the roses. She was 7, full of energy, and had never known anything but kindness. Watching her reminded me of all the innocence Lila had thrown away. One day, the little girl asked me, "Do you have grandchildren?" I paused, then smiled. "Not yet." She beamed. "You'd be a really good grandma." I ruffled her hair. "Maybe someday." One Sunday, I hosted a brunch with a few of the older women from the hospital. We sipped coffee and talked about books, old husbands, and the odd joys of aging. I told them the story, some of it at least. Not all the details, not the darkest moments, but enough to hear one of them whisper, "You were so brave to face that alone." I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. But in that moment, I realized something. Survival is a form of bravery, too. So is choosing to protect what you've built. So is drawing a line when others try to take what they didn't earn. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since before Greg got sick. Just little pieces. A robin in the garden. My hands, a portrait of the kitchen table under soft morning light. Each one was a reminder, this is mine, this life, these quiet corners, this healing. And Evan, he began dating someone, a quiet woman named June, a librarian. Kind eyes, gentle hands, a deep laugh that made him seem younger again. He didn't rush things, he was cautious, but he told me he felt calm around her. I feel like I can just be, he said one night on the phone. Not prove, not defend, just be. I said, that's how you know it's real. Spring finally arrived in full. One morning, I took out the someday box again. Not to cry, not to mourn, but to honor. I finished knitting the blanket. It took me a full week of early mornings and quiet afternoons, my fingers slower now than they once were. But I did it. And when it was done, I folded it gently and tied it with a ribbon. Not for a baby, not for closure, but for the simple act of completing something I once left unfinished. Then one evening, I sat on the back porch as the sun dipped below the rooftops and whispered to the wind I protected what mattered, even when it hurt. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a woman who had been threatened, or betrayed, or nearly robbed of her home and legacy. I felt like a woman who had taken her life back, piece by piece, day by day, with no apology. That spring brought with it something unexpected. Not drama, not tension, but simplicity. Routine. It felt strange at first. After so many months of high-stakes emotion, the absence of crisis left a kind of emotional vacuum. I would wake up, make coffee, tend the garden, go for walks, chat with neighbors, all without flinching, without worrying what trap was being set behind my back. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe in my own home. And then, one afternoon, Evan called. I'm coming to visit this weekend, he said. And I'm bringing June. I smiled. I'd love that. There was a pause. She's pregnant. The words hit softly like a breeze carrying a second chance. Really, I said. That's... Evan, that's wonderful. He exhaled relief, nerves, joy, all bundled together. I didn't think I'd feel this way again. After everything, I didn't think I deserved it. You do, I said firmly. You absolutely do. They arrived Saturday morning. June was calm, warm-eyed, visibly expectant, but glowing with quiet happiness. She greeted me with a bouquet of gardenias, a flower I hadn't seen in years, but had once planted along the front fence. I read that you used to grow these, she said. I thought it might feel like a hello. She had done her homework. Thoughtful. Intentional. She reminded me of who I used to be. We spent the afternoon making lunch, walking through the garden, sitting on the porch with lemonade. She told me about the baby's development, how far along she was, how they weren't finding out the gender yet, how Evan talked to the belly every night. He's nervous, she said later when he'd stepped out to take a call, but in the best way. He wants to be a good dad. I think he's afraid he's already failed once. I nodded slowly. He trusted the wrong person. That doesn't make him a bad father. It makes him someone who's learning. She smiled. He says he got that strength from you. After dinner, Evan and I stood in the kitchen doing dishes together, an old rhythm we hadn't shared since he was a teenager. He rinsed, I dried. You know, he said, when everything went down with Lila, I felt like I lost years of my life. Like I lost parts of myself I'll never get back. I looked at him. That's what trauma does. But being here again with June, it's like I'm getting pieces of myself back. I touched his shoulder. That's what healing does. He swallowed hard and turned to me. I never told you how sorry I am. You did. I said gently, in every action since. He looked around the kitchen. She used to say this place was a prison. I smiled. Funny. I always thought of it as home. He nodded. It is. It always was. That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. I picked up the finished baby blanket from the someday box and laid it across my lap. My fingers traced the stitches like a prayer. I'd thought this blanket had no home, that it belonged to a memory that would never come true. But now, maybe it had found its way back. Maybe not to the child I had mourned, but to the child who would arrive soon. One I could love freely without fear. One who would grow up knowing the strength of protection, the grace of starting over, and the quiet power of forgiveness. The next morning, I handed the blanket to June. I made this a while ago, I said. I wasn't sure who it was for then, but I know now. She unfolded it carefully, eyes wide, hands trembling a little. It's beautiful, she whispered. Are you sure? I nodded. Nothing would make me happier. Evan put his arm around her and kissed the top of her head. Then he looked at me with eyes full of gratitude, the kind that doesn't need words. We stood like that for a moment, the three of us. No ghosts, no resentment, just family. Rebuilding. Later, as they packed the car to leave, June gave me a tight hug. I hope we see you again soon, she said. You will, I promised. And as they drove away, I felt something settle in me. Something I hadn't had in months, maybe even years. Closure. Not just on the chaos, but on the fear that had kept me from trusting again. Lila may have tried to destroy this home, this family, this legacy, but she failed. Because now the future was no longer built on silence and strategy. It was built on something far more powerful. Love. Real love. And that no one could ever take from me again. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt different. Not just quiet or lighter, as though it had finally released the last breath it had been holding since the first time Lila threatened me over breakfast. I sat by the kitchen window holding my coffee with both hands, watching the light spill over the edge of the garden fence. That fence, Greg built it himself one summer when Evan was 10, so we could have a space to grow herbs without the neighborhood kids trampling them. We used to joke that it was the only straight thing Greg had ever built, considering he'd failed woodshop 3 times in high school. Funny how grief softens over time, turning into memories that warm you instead of break you. And now, years later, something in me was blooming again too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change, but the good kind. The kind that smells like clean sheets and sounds like soft laughter. Evan and June called often, updates from the ultrasound, baby name debates, gentle questions like, "Do you think Dad would have liked the name Caroline?" I told him Greg would have loved any name, so long as it came from love. One afternoon, Evan called and said, "We want you to be in the delivery room." I blinked. "Me?" June's voice chimed in on speaker. "Your family. The center of it, really." I cried after we hung up, tears of a different kind this time, not of grief or fear or betrayal. Tears of being seen, of being chosen. And then something unexpected happened. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was Lila's mother. "Margaret," she said, her voice shaking. "I know you probably never want to hear from us again, but I thought you should know. Lila's been hospitalized." My heart stuttered. Why she attempted something. Pills. It wasn't fatal, thank God. But she's not well. And for what it's worth, she's asking about Evan. And about you. I sat in silence, stunned by the sheer heaviness of it. I didn't hate her. I had never hated her. But she had been a hurricane through my life, and now she was breaking apart in her own storm. I asked if I could speak to her. There was a pause. Then a soft, "I'll put the phone next to her." There was shuffling, some beeping, and then a strained, barely audible voice. Margaret, I took a deep breath. I'm here. Silence. Then I'm sorry. I didn't respond at first, because I knew she wasn't just saying it to say it. Her voice cracked in the way people sound when they've lost something they didn't know how to love properly. I know you are, I said finally, but that doesn't undo what happened. I know. I don't know who I am anymore. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I heard something different in her. Not a performance, not calculation, just a woman undone. You need help, Lila, I said. Real help. And it has to come from you this time. I'm trying, she whispered. I I miss what we could have had. Then build something new, I said. Not with lies, not with threats, with honesty. She cried quietly. When the call ended, I sat alone in the dark thinking. And for the first time, I prayed for her. Truly prayed. Because some people don't need punishment, they need healing, even if they never find their way back to you. Evan was quiet when I told him about the call. I don't hate her, he said, but I don't trust her either. You don't have to, I replied. Just let go of what's already gone. He nodded. You're better at that than I am. No, I said. I just had more practice. A few days later, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was the journal Lila once kept, the one I found in the nursery box. But this time, a new entry was scribbled on the last page. Maybe I'll never be forgiven. But if I can learn to forgive myself, maybe that's where I begin. No signature. Just that. I didn't write back. I didn't have to. The baby came early. A girl. Evan and June named her Nora Grace. Grace, they said, was to honor the quiet strength that carried them through a storm they weren't sure they'd survive. Nora had Evan's eyes and June's curls. And when they placed her in my arms for the first time, she looked up at me not with recognition, but with the pure, unfiltered innocence of a new soul. I whispered, "You're safe. You're loved. You're home." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just the next chapter. This was the redemption of all that came before. The day Nora was born, the world seemed to stand still. I had always imagined becoming a grandmother would be bittersweet. I thought the memory of the child we lost would always echo in the corners of every milestone. But as I held Nora for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around mine, I didn't feel haunted. I felt healed. Her warmth in my arms wasn't just about new life, it was about a second chance. A legacy reborn not through bitterness or battle, but through patience, forgiveness, and love. Evan and June moved into a modest home just 15 minutes away. They invited me over often, Sunday dinners, lazy breakfasts, moments where we'd sit on the porch swing while Nora napped, talking about everything and nothing. I started keeping a photo album just for her, Nora's firsts, first laugh, first spoonful of peas, first time grabbing at her father's nose and squealing with joy. But one day after dinner, Evan pulled me aside. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know we've talked about the past before, but there's something I need to ask." I braced myself. If something ever happens to us, me or June, I want you to be the one who raises her. I stared at him stunned. "Evan, I'm not planning on going anywhere," he said quickly. "But I've thought about it. What kind of person do I want shaping her heart if we're not there? And the answer is easy. You." Tears welled up before I could stop them. "I would protect her with my life," I whispered. "I know," he said. "You already are." The next morning, I met with Daniel Locke again. We had paperwork to discuss documents that would finalize guardianship directives, update the trust to include Nora, and protect every part of the life we were rebuilding. Daniel smiled when I walked into the office. "You look peaceful." I sat down. "I am." We reviewed everything. I signed the new papers with steady hands. When it was done, Daniel leaned back. "You've come a long way," he said. I nodded. From being manipulated and gaslit in my own home, to building a future where my granddaughter is safe. He raised an eyebrow. And what about Lila? I don't look back anymore, I said simply. If she heals, I hope she does it far away and for the right reasons this time. He nodded. Well, you've protected everything that matters. A few days later, I was back in my garden pruning the roses. The sun was warm, the sky clear. A neighbor walked by with her dog and waved. How's the baby? She called out. Perfect, I said, smiling. Just perfect. She walked on and I went back to trimming. Then I paused. There, nestled deep in the thorns, was a single bloom I hadn't noticed before. Pale blue, delicate, not like the others. I stared at it for a long time, and then I smiled, because I knew what it meant. The memory of what was lost wasn't gone. It had just bloomed into something new. That evening, Evan and June dropped Nora off so they could have their first date night in months. I wrapped Nora in the blanket I had once knitted for a child who never arrived, and this time it felt complete. We sat in the rocking chair by the window. The wind rustled the leaves outside. She cooed softly, her eyes wide and curious, reaching toward the light filtering in through the glass. I held her close and whispered stories not about pain or betrayal or fear, but about courage, about how love can be a shield and truth, a sword, and how sometimes survival is the quietest kind of victory. She drifted off in my arms, her tiny chest rising and falling against mine. And in that stillness, I realized this house had become a sanctuary again. Not because the past had been erased, but because I had taken it back. One decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one breath, one prayer, one act of defiance at a time. And now it was full of life, of laughter, of grace, and above all, of peace. It was late summer when the final letter arrived. This time, it wasn't from Lila. It came from her attorney. A formal envelope, white with a subtle watermark addressed in careful penmanship. Inside, a single-page letter stating that Lila had decided to formally withdraw all prior claims and legal intentions regarding my home, my property, and any associated family ties. The letter included a closing line written in Lila's own hand: I release you. I release all of it. I'm sorry. No return address. No request for contact. Just closure, the quiet kind. I held the paper for a long time. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in my filing cabinet, and locked it away. Not out of fear. Not to preserve it for court. Just to mark the moment. The war was over. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes in myself. I walked taller. I laughed more freely. I started humming again while I cooked something I hadn't done since before Greg passed. It's strange how survival doesn't arrive in thunder. It slips in quietly like a sunrise through half-closed curtains. You don't even realize you're healing until one morning you wake up and your first thought isn't about who hurt you, but what joy you can find that day. Nora was crawling now. She moved like a little explorer through my living room, dragging a plush bunny with her and babbling to herself like she was telling the universe her secrets. I'd place little toys just out of reach, and she'd giggle as she stretched toward them, always eager, never discouraged. Watching her filled me with something deep and wordless. Hope. Not the naive kind, the earned kind, the kind that grows only after ruin, after darkness, after betrayal, when you realize that even the scorched earth can bloom again. One evening, Evan and June invited me to their home for dinner. It was simple pasta, salad, red wine, Nora babbling in her high chair. After dessert, Evan pulled out an envelope. Mom, he said, we're rewriting our wills. We wanted you to have this. I opened it and read the first line. In the event of our passing, Margaret Hayes will assume full legal guardianship of our daughter, Nora Grace. Tears welled in my eyes again, but this time they weren't heavy. They were a kind of joy I'd never known. You're trusting me with the most important thing in your life, I whispered. June smiled. You're the most important person in hers. That night, after they dropped me home, I walked through my house. My house slowly, as though I were memorizing it again. Every dent in the wood, every photo on the wall, every light switch Greg installed crooked as always. This home had almost been taken from me, but I didn't let it go. I had fought not with anger, not with violence, but with truth, with patience, with evidence, with love that refused to be manipulated. And I had won. The next morning, I opened the windows, let the breeze move through the rooms, and sat in the kitchen with my coffee thinking about everything that had brought me here. The girl who showed me Lila's social media post, the forged letter, the tapes, the lies, the baby that was lost, the one who came after, the woman I became through it all. Not bitter, not broken, but reborn. Outside, the garden was thriving, even the rose bush Lila had once trampled while storming off during an argument. It had grown back taller than ever, thorns sharp, petals soft, just like me. And right then, I understood something I hadn't until now. What I had built here, this home, this peace, didn't need to be protected with fear anymore. It had been tested, and it had endured. The future didn't scare me anymore. It didn't feel like something to guard against, but something to welcome. Because whatever came next, I knew this, I wouldn't face it alone. I wouldn't face it in silence. And I would never again let anyone tell me what I was worth. There are certain mornings that feel like bookmarks in your life. The kind where the light is softer, the coffee tastes deeper, and you pause mid-sip just to absorb the stillness as if your soul is quietly whispering. Remember this. That morning was one of them. The curtains swayed in the breeze. Birdsong spilled in through the kitchen window. And in my arms, Nora sat giggling with a plastic spoon in one hand and her other clutching the edge of my sweater. We were in the same kitchen where everything began, the place where Lila first issued her cruel ultimatum. But now, instead of tension, there was only light. Life. Love. I bent down, kissed the top of Nora's head, and whispered, "This is your home too, my sweet girl." She responded with a squeal and a delighted slam of her spoon onto the counter. Later that day, Evan stopped by after work. He still looked a little tired sometimes, but the heaviness was gone from his shoulders. I could see the subtle differences in him now, the way he listened more intently, the way he watched June when she spoke, the way he lingered in the nursery doorway even after Nora had fallen asleep. "You're becoming the man your father always believed you'd be," I told him that evening as we sat on the back porch. Evan smiled, gazing out across the yard. "I hope so," he said. "I feel like I'm finally walking forward instead of constantly turning back." I nodded. The past teaches, but it doesn't need to lead. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Mom, do you regret any of it?" The question hung in the air, caught between the wind and the weight of everything we'd endured. I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said slowly. "I regret the pain, the manipulation, the betrayal. But I don't regret standing up. I don't regret fighting for what was mine. And I certainly don't regret protecting my granddaughter from a future built on deceit." He nodded solemnly. "She almost ruined us." "She tried," I said. "But she failed. Because love is harder to tear down than she realized." A week later, I got a call from Lila's mother again. She updated me that Lila was still in therapy, still in recovery. No lawsuits, no threats. Just silence, and she said a strange new softness. "I don't know if she's changed," her mother admitted. "But I think she's trying." I thanked her. I wished them peace. And then, I let it go. Truly. I realized then that letting go doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it's just choosing not to carry someone else's burden anymore. Autumn arrived again the second since everything fell apart. And yet this one felt different. It didn't feel like decay or endings. It felt like harvest. like the gathering of everything I'd fought for: love, truth, dignity, all finally blooming into something tangible. Nora took her first steps in the garden that fall. Tiny, wobbly, joyful. We were under the apple tree Greg planted decades ago. She let go of my hands and took 3 uncertain steps before tumbling gently onto the grass. She blinked, then burst into laughter. So did I. There was no fear in her fall, only freedom. And watching her, I thought, that's how I want to live now. Not afraid to fall, but brave enough to walk. That evening, I took out the old photo albums again. I flipped through pages of birthdays, vacations, holidays long past. Then I came to a blank page, one I'd left empty during the hardest months, unable to document the pain. Now I placed a new photo in its center. It was of Nora in her grandmother's arms under golden light eyes wide and safe. I wrote beneath it the beginning of everything right. Then I closed the book. Not because the story was finished, but because the next chapter had already begun. The community center invited me to speak that winter. They were hosting a gathering for women who had experienced manipulation and abuse, emotional, financial, psychological. They asked me to share my story. I hesitated at first, not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't sure if I could put it into words that wouldn't reopen the wounds. But eventually, I said yes. And that night, I stood before a room of strangers and told the truth. About the daughter-in-law who used a child as a weapon. About the forged medical reports. About the gaslighting and isolation. And about the quiet rebellion of a woman who decided to fight back. Not with fists or fury, but with clarity, evidence, and strength. When I finished, there was silence, then applause, then tears. One woman came up to me and said, I thought I was the only one who felt invisible in her own home. You're not, I told her. We're never as alone as we think. Now each morning feels like a reclamation, the clink of dishes, the sun on the table, Nora's toys scattered across the floor. Each one a symbol of everything that was nearly stolen and everything I took back. I don't live in fear anymore. Not of Lila. Not of being forgotten. Not of being taken advantage of. Because I know now I'm not someone to be pushed aside. I am the foundation of this family, the keeper of its legacy, the guardian of its future. And if you've made it to the end of this story, maybe you've walked through your own storm. Maybe you know what it feels like to be manipulated, to be dismissed, to have your sanity questioned while someone else plays innocent. If so, hear me when I say this. You are not weak for being kind. You are not wrong for trusting. And you are not broken just because someone tried to break you. You're still here. And that means your story isn't over yet. So before you go, tell me, have you ever had to stand up against someone in your own family? Did you ever reclaim something you were told you had to give away? Share your story in the comments. Let's make sure no one else feels alone. And if this story meant something to you, like the video, subscribe to Grace's Truth, and come back for more. Because the truth, sometimes it saves more than just yourself. Sometimes it saves the next generation.